Hello students, welcome back. So as I had mentioned in the previous video, in this video we shall be studying about the topic human resources planning. So first of all, we need to understand what is the purpose. Before we go on to find out what is the meaning or the definition and all those things, first let us understand what is the reason behind why human resources planning is carried out. See, as you see in the slide over here, it's given forecasting the demand and supply of human resources. So a very simple definition is given. So I'll give you a small case over here so we can just understand where human resources planning comes into the picture. Now take an example of an employee called by name Varun. So Mr. Varun has been working for a company for many years. Now all of a sudden, Varun quits the company without much of prior notice. It could be for any reason. It might have been because of a big illness, or it might have been due to death, or it might have been due to some kind of mishap in the family, or it could be because of any kind of unavoidable reason. Mr. Varun had to quit the company. Now, Mr. Varun's position is vacant in the company. If the company does not have in mind certain list of people who can possibly be replacements for Varun, the company is going to get into trouble. So here the demand is Varun's position, which was there in the company, which has come up in the company because of Varun's quitting the job. The supply is the list of people which the company has in mind to fill Varun's position. If the company has not made a list of people who can be possible replacements for Varun, the company is going to be in huge trouble. One trouble what the company can get into is work gets stalled. Whatever work Varun has been doing, that work is not going on now. So somewhere work is getting stalled. Another problem the company can face is the company has not pre-decided on the list of candidates who can be possible replacements. Company has not made any decision regarding that. So what can happen is, in a very haphazard manner, the company tries to replace Varun's position. So it may resort to some kind of temporary employment agency, or it may try to quickly fill the position by conducting quick tests or quick interviews for whichever candidate it's setting its eyes upon. So what happens is the screening process is not good. The tests which are conducted, the interviews which are conducted are not that effective. You quickly want to fill the position, so something quickly, you're just making the selection process and you're finding a candidate. But this candidate whom you choose, because of choosing in a very haphazard and in a very unplanned manner, may not have the required adequate qualification, may not be adequately skilled enough to do the work. So this new candidate is actually creating further problems for the company by not doing the work properly. So company can face losses over there. After 3 months to 6 months, on evaluation of the candidate's performance, the company decides to replace that candidate because of poor performance. This replacement, this cost of replacement is going to be high. So two additional costs the company is incurring because of lack of proper planning. One additional cost is the initial recruitment, whatever you have done, the initial selection, whatever has been done. There they would have spent some extra cost. They are spending extra cost in replacing the new candidate who is not that good enough or who is not that much up to mark. So this is an additional 2 times the company is spending costs in finding a possible replacement. So this is the way in which lack of proper planning can affect the company. To avoid all these missteps, the company needs to adopt something called as human resources planning. So what do we understand by human resources planning here? It's a very simple situation. You have to make an estimate of what future vacancies can come up for your company. You have to make an estimate of a pool of people whom you can use to fill your positions in the future, if at all a vacancy come up. So from the case study, what I had explained to you previously, as I had already told you, Varun's position is the demand for the company, and the supply of company is the pool of candidates which the company has in mind to fill up Varun's position. So you're forecasting demand, you're forecasting supply, forecasting of demand and supply put together constitutes human resources planning. So here there's a little more detailed explanation here. You're foreseeing the human resources requirement for the organization and future supply of human resources, making necessary adjustments between the two. And you're foreseeing the possibility of developing a proper supply pool of candidates in order to fill requirements in the future. So we will now be studying the various steps involved in human resources planning. Human resources planning encompasses a total of 6 steps. The first one being environmental scanning. So what we understand by environmental scanning over here is we need to look out in the environment. When I'm saying about looking out for the environment, I need to look out not only in the domestic environment. I should look out for the environment not only within my locality. I should also look out for the possible set of candidates who can come up within the city, within the state, within the country, or within the globe also, in case I'm talking about an international company, a multinational company. Now, proper environmental scanning, it helps us in identifying problems, threats, and opportunities. And if you properly do environmental scanning, you can convert a threat or a problem into an opportunity. So I can give you one example of a certain MNC which had started off in the United States. To be specific, the company is Amazon. So when Amazon was initially conducting its operations within the United States, what happened was they had one customer service center somewhere in Seattle. Now this in United States. So this customer service center was quite expensive. See, employees, even unskilled employees, are quite expensive out in the United States. The package that is paid to them, the compensation that is paid to them is quite high compared to any other developing countries. So this customer service center was quite an expensive service center because the employees were expensive. You had to pay a lot of salary for these employees. Although the growth was estimated to be somewhere about 20 to 30%, you were expecting 20 to 30% growth in customer complaints coming up. The growth was not justifying the too much cost that the company was spending to maintain this customer service center. So they had decided to shut it down. Now, if they had not conducted proper environmental scanning, the company would have shut down the customer service center altogether. But instead, this company had undertaken good environmental scanning and understood that we need to look out not only for within the United States market, we can even look out for other developing nations such as India. So in India, when they had looked out for the labor conditions in India, they saw that the labor conditions are much more inexpensive in India. So you can pay the employees a much lesser amount and get the same job done. So they decided to resort to something called as outsourcing here. They shifted the customer service center to India over here and appointed employees within India who were paid a much lesser salary compared to what was paid to those US employees previously. So obviously the costs have been cut down, and at the same time they could address the growth in customer complaints which was coming up, the customer requirements which was coming up, the 20 to 30% growth they could still address by opening a fresh service center in a developing economy like India for a much lesser package. So the cost of maintaining this customer service center was much lesser. And at the same time, they were catering to customer complaints. So in this way, proper environmental scanning helped the company in converting a problem into an opportunity. Now, environmental scanning encompasses another component over here where we are speaking about the labor market. See, labor market can be of, I think I had spoken to you about this in the previous video itself. Labor market can either be a loose labor market or it can be a tight labor market. An example of a loose labor market is where abundant of people with required skills and experience are available. So if your company has a vacancy, if it needs to hire new employees, it can easily acquire those new employees because many people are there. In contrast, there is something called as a tight labor market. A tight labor market is what creates problem for the company. In a tight labor market, the number of people with the required skill set, KSA, to be more specific, if you say KSA means knowledge, skill, and abilities. The number of people with these KSAs are quite less. So obviously the company is having problems in finding suitable candidates to fill that position. And please note, it's not only your company who's looking for candidates to fill that position, it's also your competitors, other companies in your industry who are also looking for similar candidates to fill their positions. So there is a huge demand for people with such kind of skills. Now, tight labor market can come up in both types of candidates. It can come up for jobs which are requiring high level of skills. It can also come up for jobs which are requiring a relatively lower skill. It can come for high skilled labor. It can also come for unskilled labor also, or semi-skilled labor also. Take an example of a highly skilled highly skilled labor. If you take an example of laser optics technology, people who are having knowledge on laser optics technology is going to be quite less. So companies who are working on this laser optics technology and who want people who have good knowledge on laser optics technology are going to find it difficult. A tight labor market we are speaking about. I'll give you an example of unskilled labor over here. Take an example of employing people for a child care facility, or take an example of employing people as a security guard. All these things are semi-skilled, or it may even be an unskilled work. But please note, such people, you need a lot of honesty and integrity to work in such kind of job roles. There are not many people out there who are who are having high integrity, or who are very honest, or who are very good natured. So obviously it is difficult for us to find suitable candidates for such positions. So again, we are speaking about a tight labor market here. So we understand that companies will definitely conduct screening tests in order to employ such people. Now take an example of a security agency. They will obviously, there are companies which even conduct various psychological tests to find out the suitability of a candidate. And since this particular job role, qualified people for this particular job role are quite less, whatever results the test might predict, irrespective of the results that the test might predict, the company might not have much of a choice. It might have to hire a person who is probably performing better compared to the others. You cannot expect a person to perform extremely well in such situations and take them for the job. So this is the problem with a tight labor market here. Company will not, it limits the HR planning abilities of the company. So the company will just have to take in whatever comes their way, the best at least which comes their way. So this is a problem with the tight labor market. Now moving on to the second element, which comes under human resources planning. The second step which has to be followed under human resource planning is something called as labor demand forecasting. So what is labor demand forecasting? Labor demand forecasting is trying to make an estimate of how many positions will become vacant in your company in the near future. What is the importance of labor demand forecasting? Especially for startups. Research says that many of the startups, many of small companies fail, not because of lack of cash, not because of lack of clients or customers, not because of the lack of infrastructure, but they fail because of lack of skilled employees, or lack of people who are qualified enough to do the work. It is the main reason why many companies fail. So this is the reason why, from this we can understand what the importance of labor demand forecasting is. So we will be studying something called as the methods of demand forecasting for labor. There are two types of methods of demand forecasting. You have qualitative methods and you have quantitative methods. So if you notice, this concept of demand forecasting comes in many topics. It comes in human resources, it comes in marketing, it might come in economics also. So there are a wide range of subjects in which we will be studying about this topic. So specifically from the point of view of HR, if I'm speaking about demand forecasting, there are two techniques of demand forecasting. One of them is a qualitative technique, another one is a quantitative technique. Qualitative techniques are basically subjective in nature. It cannot be quantified. It cannot be put down in the form of numbers. But on the other hand, quantitative techniques are something which is very objective. You can specify it in terms of numbers and make certain estimates. Anyway, speaking about the qualitative technique here, have a look at the first point here. We are speaking about centralized techniques of demand forecasting. In a centralized technique of demand forecasting, it is the HR department which takes responsibility for forecasting demand for all the departments of the company or all the functional units of the company. So the HR department, so by this we are assuming that the HR department is having full knowledge on the business situation and is up to date on whatever is happening among the various other departments of the company. So for the production department, for the purchase department, for the finance department, for the accounting department, for the marketing department, for all these sub departments, the HR department is making estimates of which employees are expected to quit and what all positions are expected to become vacant in all these departments. So the onus of responsibility of making a demand forecasting is vested solely with the HR department in a centralized approach. In a decentralized approach, centralized approach works well for small companies. Centralized approach may not work well for big companies. HR department cannot keep a tab on what's happening with all the departments, especially if I'm speaking about companies which are distributed among different geographical areas, among different countries. One centralized HR department may not be able to do this for all the various functional units. In such a case, a decentralized approach will be taken for conducting demand forecasting when it comes to human resources. So what happens in a decentralized approach is each of these functional units, each of these departments make their own estimates for their own department, submit those estimates to the HR. The HR will compile these estimates from each of these departments. There are 4 departments here. So department 1, the estimate goes to HR. Department 2, estimate goes to HR. Department 3, estimate goes to HR. Department 4, estimate goes to HR. So the HR compiles all the estimates made by the different departments and accordingly executes their action. Okay. So centralized, the first point is a top-down approach. Decentralized, on the other hand, is a bottom-up approach. Moving on to the third technique here, there is something known as Delphi technique. Delphi technique, another name for Delphi technique is the expert opinion method. So let us now see what exactly happens in the Delphi technique of demand forecasting. So this picture, which is given here, is talking about a facilitator, an intermediary. It's talking about 5 experts, and it is also showing you the way in which interaction is happening between the facilitator or the intermediary and the experts. So here, if you see, what is the way in which a Delphi technique works exactly. Now have a look at these 5 experts who are mentioned in this pink circle. Now, many of them will be having their own ego issues. Many of them may not be comfortable in working with the other experts here. So when these experts put together discuss amongst themselves, a proper conclusion may not come up because each of them will put their own viewpoint. Each of them will regard their viewpoint as being superior to others' viewpoint. So they may not agree to another person's viewpoint. So ultimately, the discussion will never come to an end. So there may be a lot of tensions also whenever each of these people are interacting with the other persons. In such situations, it's preferable not to allow the experts to interact with each other personally. Instead, there is a mediator or an intermediary or a facilitator who is interacting with each of these individual experts. So the interaction is restricted with the expert number 1 and the intermediary, expert number 2 and the intermediary, expert number 3 and the intermediary, and so on. Expert number 1 and expert number 2 will not interact with each other. Please note this point here. Okay. So how does this Delphi technique work? So what happens is a facilitator or an intermediary collects from each expert that expert's assumptions or forecasts. So expert 1 gives one assumption or forecast to the intermediary. The intermediary collects it. Expert number 2 gives their forecast to the intermediary collects it. He collects it from expert 3. He collects it from expert 4. He collects it from expert 5. After looking at these forecasts and assumptions which each of these experts have given, the intermediary would compile all the assumptions and forecasts and judgments given by all the experts together in one form. Then he will start passing on this compilation to each of the experts individually. Expert number 1 takes the compiled report, makes necessary corrections, passes it on to the intermediary. Intermediary passes it on to expert number 2, who makes further additions or alterations. Goes on to expert 3, goes on to expert 4, expert 5. This process keeps getting repeated over and over again until all the experts come to a consensus on the assumptions or the forecast. So this is a very repetitive process. Again and again, the intermediary will have to keep hopping between one expert and the other expert with their respective corrections on the assumptions or on the forecasts. And finally, a report can be prepared. In a situation where the process is too lengthy, where a final judgment is never concluded to, the intermediary himself, in consultation with the top management, will make his own judgments based on whatever judgments the other experts have given, and finally submit the proposal to the top management. So this is the way in which decisions can be made. See, this is good enough in case of probably short-term forecasts. That is something which has to be done within 1 year. But this technique, as we have already seen, it's quite a lengthy technique. It may not take you anywhere, or it's so lengthy that by the time you make a decision, your competitor has already stepped ahead. Your competitor has already taken in the candidates. So you have to be very careful when you're using this technique here. Moving on to the next technique, we have something known as the nominal group technique. So how does the nominal group technique? We can just have a look at. This is similar to the Delphi technique, what we had seen in the last slide. But the difference between Delphi technique and nominal group technique is, in the Delphi technique, the experts were not interacting with each other. But in the nominal group technique, the experts are interacting with each other. Okay. So what happens here is, if you see from this picture, if you see the picture which is given to the left-hand side, there are a group of experts who, step 1, they put their individual opinions, their individual judgments in a paper. Okay. Then whatever judgments each of them have individually put down, step 2, a group discussion starts off. Based on the group discussion, certain ideas will get more importance. Certain ideas may just get discarded then and there. So a list of ideas is prepared based on group discussion. So if you just have to, if I just have to repeat these steps here. Step 1, what happens? A group discussion takes place. Step 1, what happens? Individually, each of these experts will put forth their ideas without interacting with the others. Step 2, a group discussion takes place. At the end of the group discussion, certain ideas are presented and a list of ideas which has been accepted by all members of the group are compiled. The third step here is, each of these ideas are ranked based on member vote or based on ranks which are assigned by each of these experts. So take an example of member vote, which I have mentioned here. What happens in a member vote is 3 ideas are presented. Now let us say those ideas. Now have a look at the picture on the right hand side. One idea is evaluate new suppliers. The second idea is hire new purchasing agent. The third idea is to create new design. Okay, so these are the 3 ideas. According to member vote, if it works, evaluate new suppliers. How many experts are favoring this option? So let us say out of 5 people who are sitting here, 3 people favor the option of evaluate new suppliers. Hire new purchasing agent. How many experts are for this option? How many experts are for this decision? So 5 experts agree that this decision is good. create new design. How many experts are in favor of this option? Let's say only one expert is voting in favor of the option of create new design. So if we see, evaluate new suppliers is getting 3 votes. Hire a new purchasing agent is getting 5 votes. And create a new design is getting only 1 vote. So obviously, which decision is applicable here? The second decision of hiring a new purchasing agent is what will be applicable. This is one way in which a decision can be arrived at. Another way in which a decision can be arrived is what I have mentioned over here in the slide. Each of the experts, let's say you have 4 experts, Paul, Judy, Tammy, and John. Each of these experts have to evaluate 3 ideas. Evaluate new suppliers, hire a new purchasing agent, create a new design. So what will Paul do is, Paul will assign his rank for evaluate new suppliers as 4. The rank assigned for hiring someone is 3. Rank assigned to create a new design is 2. Judy assigns 3, 2, and 3 respectively for the 3 options. Similarly, Tammy assigns their rank and John assigns his rank. The ranks of all the experts are totaled, and a total of ranks of all the experts are arrived at for each of the decision. That is, evaluate new suppliers gets a total rank of 13. Hire new purchasing agent gets a total rank of 11, and create new design gets a total rank of 11 again. So from this, you can understand which decision will be counted. Evaluate new supplier is the decision which is accepted by all the experts over here. So this is the way in which, again, demand forecasting can be done. So if you see from this example's point of view, they are not, a demand does not come up for a new position. Hiring a new purchasing, they don't have to hire a new purchasing agent, because if you just evaluate some new suppliers, it's more than enough. Okay, so this is the way in which decision is made. So all this while we were speaking about the qualitative techniques for demand forecasting. Now moving on to the quantitative techniques for demand forecasting, there are 3 quantitative techniques for demand forecasting: trend analysis, ratio analysis, and a scatter plot. So first let us understand the meaning of trend analysis. See, trend analysis makes an assumption that whatever has been happening over the past, a similar thing is expected to happen even in the future also. So in the past, supposing, let us say, over the, so the company will evaluate, from the point of view of HR, the company will evaluate at the end of a particular financial year, how many employees are quitting the company. Over the past 5 years, the company has been looking at what has happened over the past. It looks at the historical data. It looks back and sees what has happened over the past 5 years. In those past 5 years, if the company sees a certain pattern has emerged, it can easily make estimate for the future also. For example, over the past 5 years, at the end of each year, it has understood out of the company's total 100 employees, 15 employees have been quitting the company every year. So at the end of 2014, 15 employees have quit. At the end of 2015, again 15 employees have quit. At the end of 2016, the same trend has been happening. So obviously you can make an estimate that at the end of 2020, how many employees are going to quit? It's going to be 15. The answer is simple. A certain pattern can also emerge. At the end of 2014, 15 employees had quit. At the end of 2015, 10 employees had quit. At the end of 2016, 12 or 13 employees had quit. So you notice that the number of employees who are quitting is anywhere between 10 to 15. Out of a total group of 100 employees who are working for the company, over the past 5 years, we noticed that 10 to 15 employees have been quitting the company. So you can easily make an estimate for the forthcoming financial year, how many of them are expected to quit the company. So you can prepare yourself a pool of candidates to replace these people. So you can prepare yourself to replace at least 10 to 15 people here. So accordingly, you have to make arrangements for supply of human resources to fill those vacant positions which are coming up very soon. Okay, so this is the way in which trend analysis works. Have a look at the next point here. We have something known as ratio analysis. What do we understand by ratio analysis? See, ratio analysis is nothing but the ratio between a causal factor. Let us say the causal factor is sales and the number of employees required. Now, from looking at our previous reports again, we have understood that on an average, one salesperson generates 5 lakhs of sales per year. Now, the company is adopting a growth strategy. Competitors are all performing very well. So company also wants to perform well. The company wants to increase its sales from 5 lakhs to 30 lakhs. So you just think a company which has been employing one person to generate 5 lakh sales, if it wants to reach 30 lakhs of sales, how many people should it employ? The answer, immediately if you think about it, the answer comes to 6 salespersons. But this is where the company has to exercise caution while forecasting the demand. We cannot just immediately say 6 persons. The reason being here is, of course, quantitatively, if you see, one person generating 5 lakhs means 6 persons will generate 30 lakhs of sales. Quantitatively, if you see, it's working out. However, there are some qualitative factors, situational factors which come into the picture which has to be considered. The first point, if you see, efficiency may vary. So if I go back to this example here, one person may generate 5 lakhs of sales. Another salesperson may not be motivated enough to generate 5 lakhs of sales. He may be good enough to produce only 3 lakhs worth of sales. There may be a third person who's super motivated. So rather than producing 5 lakhs of sales, that person might be in a position to generate somewhere about 6 to 7 lakhs of sales per year. So the efficiency of people varies. So according to this, our demand forecasting also has to be considered. There is another interesting factor which has to be considered, something called as a learning curve. So how does this learning curve work? Meaning of learning curve is this. See, it states that as an employee keeps doing work repeatedly, the employee improves in his work. So an employee who has been able to produce 10 units of products all this while for the past 1 year, he continues to work on the same project for the next 2 or 3 years, rather than producing just 10 units of products. Because of his improvement in that work, he'll be able to produce 20 or 30 units of the products. So based on this learning curve and improvement in efficiency also, our demand forecasting has to be done. So let's take an example over here. 100 workers, again, we are employing ratio analysis here again. 100 workers are able to produce 15 engines. And for those 100 workers, let's say you need 20 supervisors. Now, the company is planning to expand production. The company is deciding to increase its output to 45 engines. So just think how many workers and supervisors are required. Immediately when we think of it, we will think that, okay, if 100 workers are producing 15 engines, if I have to produce 45 engines, we need 300 workers. And to supervise those 300 workers, we may need 60 supervisors. So this is what immediately comes to our mind. Okay. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, so we may think that we will be needing 60 supervisors and we will be needing 300 workers, but this is not the case. So according to learning curve, if you see, what happens is, for 1 year, 100 workers may be producing 15 engines. But because of doing the same work again and again, they may improve in their activities. So thereby, in the second year, rather than producing 15 engines, these 100 workers may probably be able to produce 30 engines. All right. And since their work is also improving, the number of supervisors might have to reduce here for them. You may not need 20 people to supervise these people. Probably 10 people might be sufficient to supervise these people now. So the learning curve is coming into effect, because of which the improvement is happening in terms of output and reduction is happening in terms of supervision. So thereby, if we probably consider this, if I have to estimate demand for producing 45 engines, probably employing another 200 workers might be sufficient. And probably employing another 20 supervisors might be sufficient. Okay, so this is the way in which demand forecasting has to be considered. Why am I saying 200 workers here to produce 45 engines? The first 100 workers level of efficiency has gone up so much that rather than producing 15 engines, they can now produce 30 engines. Now the new 100 employees who are coming in, they are new to the job. So they can produce only 15 engines now. So it is 30 plus 15, which totally comes to 45 engines. So initially, just imagine you would have ended up employing 300 people. Instead of 300 people, you're employing only 200 people. You might have employed 60 supervisors. Instead of 60 supervisors, you're employing only an additional 10 or 20 supervisors. Okay, so this is how companies can correct mistakes in their estimates and make sure that they are employing just the right number of people and not overstaffing their company or their production units. Have a look at the last quantitative technique here. You have something known as a scatter plot. I'll give you one example of how a scatter plot works. Now, let us take an example of a hospital. Now, this hospital has so far it has had only 500 beds. Now, for those 500 beds, it has a certain number of nurses. Hospital wants to increase their capacity to 1,200 beds. So the hospital has to make a decision on how many nurses have to be appointed. So the HR director might probably, and the nursing director. So both these people together, they might probably collect data from the different hospitals here. They will probably call up the different hospitals and find out, according to the number of beds, how many nurses are those hospitals employing. So here is the data which is given to you on the left-hand side. For a hospital which has 200 beds, the number of registered nurses is 240. Another hospital which has 300 beds is having 260 registered nurses. A third hospital with 400 beds is having 470 registered nurses. And so on, it goes on for the different hospitals which has provided data. Based on this data, a graph will be plotted. So in the x-axis, that is the horizontal axis, you have the hospital size, which is the number of beds. In the vertical axis, which is the y-axis, you have the number of registered nurses who have to be appointed. So the x and the y-axis will be matched, and accordingly, a dot will be posted. A dot will be made. So like this, the x and y axis of the data which is given in the left hand side has been plotted out in the form of a graph. If you just go through this graph, you will understand better. If you need any further explanation on this graph, I think the video is not a good portal for me to give further explanation. Whenever we meet in our physical classes, I can give you a further explanation on the graph. So once these dots are made, a line is made which is minimizing the distance between the dots, if you notice. So once this line is made, it will give you a rough estimate on how many nurses may be required for a 200. The direction in which this line is going will give you a rough estimate on how many nurses will be required for a 1,200 capacity hospital beds. So from this, we come to a conclusion for 1,200, if I am enhancing the capacity of the number of hospital beds, I will be required to appoint 1,210 nurses based on the data collected from other hospitals and based on what the scatter plot is revealing. So with this, I will be concluding my video with the methods of demand forecasting. In my next video, I'll give you more details regarding the other steps in human resources planning, one of which encompasses the supply of human resource forecasts, and I will be speaking to you about something called as gap analysis, action programming, and control and evaluation. Thank you. I'll see you in the next video.